As said, I'm John Henry, Chairman of the Committee for the Republic. Tonight is one of those special occasions where we combine Defender of Liberty Awards with our monthly Salon. The committee is honored to present its award to 4 Knight Ridder journalists who exposed the lies and deception of the Bush administration's invasion of Iraq. Bureau Chief John Walcott and Knight Ridder's top investigative reporters, Jonathan Landay, Warren Strobel, and Joe Galloway. Now, they say they were just doing their job, but let's be clear. They were not just doing their job. They did the right thing in the face of social ostracism and defamatory accusations of disloyalty. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black elaborated in the New York Times versus U.S., and the quote is, paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and send them off to distant lands to die of foreign shot and shell. So no, Saddam Hussein did not possess weapons of mass destruction. No, there was no connection between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. No, there was no Iraqi attempt to purchase yellowcake uranium from Niger. Our 4 Knight Ridder journalists alone resisted the temptation to get in bed with the government to ingratiate themselves with high-level sources. It's painful to reflect on what this says about our nation. We hope this special occasion, this special recognition, will provide an antidote to the alarming cultural decay that is racing our country towards self-ruination. I'd like to read the inscription to you, and Max, can you put, we will be sending you these Defender of Liberty Awards, but maybe Max can post it now. Max, can we technically put it up there? So each one of you has one of these, and the inscription I'd like to read, it reads, courage is the first virtue, because without it, none of the other virtues are possible. Now I'd like to turn to the other half of our program. Well, let me clap and give you guys a great hand. I really, it's great.
Here are the, let me.
You're going to put them all up? Jonathan, okay. Good. Excellent. Yeah. Good.
Bruce?
I'm really proud to be an American when I meet fellow citizens like you. You really make it really special. Okay, so now let's turn to Rob Reiner. I'd like to turn it over to you, and you're the guy that brought this story forward, and with your movie Shock and Awe. I'd like to hand it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, John. It was a real pleasure for me to be able to make this movie, because I, like so many others, was so frustrated when we watched our country be lied again into a war. We had done that once when I was young in Vietnam, and I just couldn't believe that it was happening for a second time. And I was also very fortunate to work very closely with the 4 gentlemen that you're honoring tonight, Joe and John and Jonathan and Warren. They were with me the whole making of the movie. They were on the set, and there's a line. I played John Walcott in the movie, and Michelle, my wife, gave me one bit of direction. Just try not to be so Jewish. So I did the best I could, given my heritage. But there was a line in the movie that I felt really summed up the essence of great journalism, which is, And it's my character says this to the group assembled. They had just watched Dick Cheney meet the press, and spewing all the lies that he did in the lead up to the war. And John Walcott says the job of a journalist is essentially when the government says something, you have only one question to ask: is it true? And that really is the job of journalists. And unfortunately, we've gotten to a position now with, and a large part of it because of social media, that it is very, very hard for the real truth seekers, the real journalists who are trying to get to the truth and trying to present the truth to break through. If we had any question as to whether or not misinformation and disinformation had power, all you need to do is look at the war in Iraq and also the insurrection and the violent attempt to take over the U.S. government. Both of those things were fostered based on lies, based on disinformation. In one case, upwards of 1 million people died as a result of that lie. And in the other case, we almost lost our democracy. So there is no greater import than to have a free press that is allowed access and can fight for access to the truth. But that is getting more and more difficult as we go along, particularly with social media, and we see it every day. So when we look at people like Joe Galloway and John Walcott and Warren Strobel and Jonathan Landay, and to see what they were able to do, fighting like true journalists to get the truth out to the American public, only to be buried by the disinformation that came out of the Bush administration, mostly through Dick Cheney and others. It's a cautionary tale. The film is a cautionary tale because it shows us that if we do not cling to this wonderful First Amendment right of a free press, we have no real chance at democracy. And we're fighting for it now, and it's getting more and more difficult. But guys like John and Jonathan and Warren and Joe, these are the kinds of people we need, and we need more of them from here on. So I'm just very proud to have been part of this. It's a film that I look at as one of my most proud efforts that I've done. And I just want to thank them for not only helping me make the film, but also for doing the work that they do and for continue to fight. And you said Knight Ridder. Knight Ridder was a last bastion of real truth seeking. And
hurrah!
yeah, well, I mean, it's true. And even the New York Times with Judith Miller, bought into the disinformation. And same thing with the Washington Post. Very few outlets. And Knight Ridder was the one that allowed these journalists to tell the truth. And so we need more of it. And I just want to thank you guys. And I'm going to turn it over. Did Landay show up? Has he shown up yet, or is he still wandering around the streets in his bicycle gear?
No, I'm here, Rob. Thanks very much. I'm sorry for being late.
Yeah, that's okay, Jonathan. That's par for the course for you.
But
There you go.
Can I interject 1 second? Max, can you mute everybody else, please, who's not talking? Max, are you there?
That's a good idea.
Just mute whoever's not talking. It's really
because we're hearing phone calls.
Yeah, and we're hearing people, and you don't want to pull a Jeffrey Toobin here.
Yeah, that's for sure. No Jeffrey Toobins here. But I just want to turn it over to the 4 journalists, and I don't know which order you want to go in, but you can each speak a little bit. But like I said, I'm very honored to have been able to work with you, and more honored to applaud the great work you did in that run up to the war. So who's talking first? Who wants to talk first? Looks like Strobel. Oh, but there's
I'll
Walcott.
lead off.
There's Walcott. Well, first of all, thank you, Rob. And speaking to the point that Marie made, we could never have done what we did without the support of Knight Ridder. I only found out long after the fact that when advertisers came to Tony Ritter, who was the CEO of the company, and asked when he was going to see another one of those damn stories again, so he could pull his ads, and the response was always, "You'll see it when I see it, when it's in the paper." And that kind of support was essential to what we tried to do. Unfortunately, the economic foundations of the industry are, I think, an even bigger problem than social media is. And they combine in a way that has robbed reporters like Warren and John and Joe of the time it takes to dig out the truth. The rush now is for anything that will attract attention, anything sensational, anything you can call a scoop or an exclusive. And that just increases one of the worst traits of journalism, and that's the reliance on high-level sources. There's another line in the movie that I think holds up really well, and that is, if you think the value of a source is directly proportional to his or her rank, the relationship is more often inverse. And so that's one of the big differences. And the second big difference, before I turn it over to one of the guys who did the real work, is who we were writing for. We were not writing for the New York or Washington audience. And that's where journalistic economic independence is concentrated now. Newspapers like the Knight Ridder papers no longer have the ability to do the kind of work we did. Some of them are gone out of business. So the other key line, I think, in the movie is in the same series of remarks that was quoted earlier about asking the government whether something is true or not. And it was that, we're not ABC, we're not NBC, we're not CBS, we're not the New York Times, we're not the Washington Post. We don't write for people who send other people's kids to war. We write for people whose kids get sent to war. So our audience, which covered about 52, I think, military bases, was very much in our minds when the administration started talking about sending men and women to war. We weren't thinking so much about Dick Cheney or Don Rumsfeld or what they thought of what we did. And I think a lot of journalism has lost touch with those folks now. I think it's reflected in the Edelman Trust Barometer, among other things. And I think that's a very unhealthy thing for our democracy. So with that, I will turn it over to whoever wants to pipe up next.
Jonathan, you talk a lot.
Sometimes. First of all, again, apologies for tuning in late. We pick up where John left off, and that is, I was up on Capitol Hill on January 6th, right in the middle of all of that, and it came just, really struck me then as it did back when we were doing the reporting about just how destructive and dangerous false and fake and exaggerated information can be, and how it can erode the foundations of our democracy. And in a way, I was glad I was there because I was able to report, from the scene, what I was seeing and how these people who had been instigated by the President of the United States and his hangers-on. And it was the same thing in a way that happened in the March to War in Iraq. Our reporting about, which never said, oh, they're lying to you, but raised serious doubts about the information they were using to make their case. We saw the same thing happen on January 6th, where the bullhorn the bully pulpit from the White House was used to at least turn a portion of the American public against the Constitution, just as it was used to turn a large portion of the American public into supporting a war of choice, not a war of necessity. And that has just left me, very, very concerned, or even more concerned than I already was, with with the state of American journalism, the impact social media has had on it, the impact that the internet writ large has on the economic foundations of our art. It is an art. I consider it an art, and which was one of the reasons why I wanted to be there. I had been in the street for every one of those the demonstrations leading up to January 6th. And I wanted to be there because I wanted to be able to chronicle the impact of fake information, of false information, once again. And so, I want to thank the committee for this award and the recognition that comes with it. Really, I'm glad that there is an organization here in this country that does pay attention to this very, very critical issue. And with that, I will pass it on.
Warren, are you ready, Warren? You're drinking, you're ready, it looks like it. Gotta unmute him.
There we go. I'm honored to be part of this group and for the award tonight. I'm honored, Rob, to have worked with you as you made this movie and to get to know you and Michelle and your family, and we really became family. I consider you family.
Make my audio
And I'm honored to call myself an alum of Knight Ridder.
Alt A.
On my little Twitter description, it says, among other things, Knight Ridder alum. So I've been thinking about this a lot over the last week or so since we found out that we were going to get this award. And, I try to put things in a historical perspective. Little time has passed now. This September will be the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. Of course, it was 9/11 that started us on this journey after Bush tried to use that horrible event for his own purposes. I think, look, every president, Republican or Democrat, tries to make reality what they say it is. Arguably, LBJ did that by trying to tell the American people that, things were going well in Vietnam. Bush did it in a particularly pernicious way in terms of a preemptive war that had horrible impacts both in the Middle East and at home. American soldiers, American families. I think Trump took it arguably to another level for different reasons, for his own egotistical, political, personal reasons. He would say something was black when it was white and vice versa. And as John just described, we've seen some of the results with that. What I'm saying is not to try and some sort of moral relativism between these different presidents, but to say that our work continues as journalists. It has to continue. Whether Biden is president or whoever follows them, our job is to hold them accountable, to afflict the comfortable, comfort the afflicted, tell the truth, hold people to power, and find the best available version of the truth with the time and limitations of daily journalism. And I think it goes without saying, but it should be said, our work holds up pretty well. It's been, 17 years, 18 years almost since the invasion of Iraq, and no weapons of mass destruction have been found. We were told, I think John Walcott was told, that there is a former senior Bush administration official who goes back to Iraq once a year looking for those WMDs. Nope, not there. Obviously, no ties to terrorism were ever found. So I think the body of work holds up extremely well, and I'm proud to have the shock and awe poster, Rob, in my office here over my left shoulder. The other thing I'd like to say is I'm really concerned too about the future and the future of information. When we as journalists tried to bring it to the future a little bit, trying to the present a little bit, trying to hold Trump to account, we would write these great stories, the Wall Street Journal, the Post, Reuters, others, about his financial misdoings, about the size of his inauguration crowd wasn't what he was, and on and on and on, pointing out what was truth. And it only impacted, I don't know, 50% of the population or 40% of the population. There was a great section of the population that what we wrote and said broadcasting media didn't matter because they were going to believe Trump no matter what. And that gets to the point that ever since the advent of cable news, now the internet and social media, we've become increasingly divided. I wrote a story yesterday about a report from something called the National Intelligence Council, which every 4 years does a look at what the world's going to look like 20 years from now. And one of the things they said is we're increasingly becoming collected in information silos, where we get grouped with people who believe what we believe, see the world how we see the world, have political views that are similar to ours, and we get reinforced by that. So I don't know how we break that chain, but it does make it makes what we do all the more important, but it also makes it the future really, really murky. So with that, I'll just say thank you again.
The cleanup hitter, Joe Galloway. Where's Joe? Is he around?
I'm
Yeah,
here.
Oh, there you
Joe's up there.
Well, I want to thank the committee for the award and thank Rob and Michelle for making the movie, welcoming us into the family, and letting us watch the making of the movie, participate in the making of the movie. I think I had one of the best lines in the movie where I remarked caustically that I had left Rumsfeld and the general sweating like a whore in church. And I can't think of anybody who deserved it more. You know, we were really talked into that war. The last hoorah was Colin Powell at the United Nations. And there's a backstory to that. He had been flim-flammed by George Tenet, the CIA director, who fed him bullshit by the yard as intelligence, and he threw most of it in the trash. Scooter Libby was there representing Dick Cheney, and they had 3 nights of conferences in the CIA director's conference room out at Langley, and Powell was there all 3 nights. He was throwing this bogus stuff away, and he got down to the last 20%. And Tennant said, Colin, I guarantee this. This is solid gold. And Powell, the loyalist, bought it and went to the UN and sold it. But I must say, you know, that first year, every American intelligence team in Iraq was out looking for what they had said was there. Bioweapons trucks, nuclear research facilities where they were enriching uranium, all of that. They looked everywhere, found nothing. And at the end of that first year, Powell picked up the phone and called George Tenet. And he said, George, I want to talk about how the intelligence stream was salted with lies. And Tennant said, oh, Colin, I've been meaning to call you and apologize over that.
Whoa.
And Powell said, I did not call you for an apology, George. I called you to tell you that next week I'm going to make a public call for a complete, thorough investigation of how the mine was salted with all those lies. And Tennant resigned that next week. Unfortunately, Powell didn't call for the complete investigation, and it was never held. It would have pointed directly back to Dick Cheney, Scooter Libby, Don Rumsfeld, and his stovepipe intel devices in the Pentagon. So, in the end, Colin Powell sold his reputation down the river, and the liars got away with it, more or less. Back to whoever wants to talk. Got some questions for Rob, I think someone said.
I have a question for you, Joe. I got a question for you. Do you think at any point, could you guys have relationships, both you, John, have relationships with Colin Powell? Do you think he will ever do the kind of mea culpa that McNamara did over Vietnam at some point in his life?
John, what do you think? You talk to him more often than I do.
I doubt it, Joe, for the reasons that you cited. He's the loyal, as you say in the movie, he's ever the loyal soldier. And now 20 years have passed. I'm not sure he sees any useful outcome of pursuing it now. Most of the people who led that effort are off the stage. Rumsfeld's become virtually invisible. We don't hear from Cheney much. We hear from one of his daughters far more than we hear from him. So I think my guess is no. I've never asked him directly, but that's my guess.
The only reason I ask it is because McNamara was in his 90s when he did it, and it was only because they did a documentary, and he finally came forward and said it. I don't know. It would certainly be nice to set the record straight.
I'm like John. I don't think Powell is ever going to do the mea culpa. And as for McNamara, everything the man ever said, including the A's, ands, and these, was a lie.
Good. So, Catherine Waller, why don't you unmute and jump in here? I know you had some. Your mute, Max. Can you unmute Catherine?
Okay, thank you. Well, Rob, that's not up to me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Rob, I have to say that John enlisted me, he said, to do some movie speak with you. So, so I have a few questions about the movie, whereas, most of the conversation is going to be about the journalist. But I'm fascinated, really. I'm such a fan of your career, and this is such a complicated story. You're such an experienced feature film director, but I wonder if you ever considered making the story as a documentary, or in retrospect, how do you feel about the value of dramatizing the story or just documenting it?
Well, that's a very good question. They did do a documentary. I believe it was on PBS, and I believe it was who was the journalist? Used to be press secretary for Lyndon Johnson.
Bill Moyers.
Bill Moyers.
Of course.
And the four journalists did participate in that, and they did a really good documentary. And I had seen that when I was preparing the film, And so that had been done. And I always feel like, you know, you have a tremendous responsibility when you're making a movie that's based on truth, reality, and actual fact, to be as faithful as you possibly can, because I understand that most people get their history through movies and television. And so if, you know, especially with all the disinformation that goes out, you don't want to be have a movie out there that colors it in a way that future generations say that's the way it happened. So it was very important to me to make it as close to a documentary as possible. And that's why I enlisted the 4 journalists to, you know, to inform me as to what actually happened. What happened at Night Ritter? What happened when they discussed? I was able to figure out some of their sources. I'm not going to say who they are, but I figured it out as we were going along. But they told me this is who we talked to, this person, that person, and it was important to me. But I also feel that you can reach more people with a movie than you can with a documentary. It's hard, you know. I did a film years ago called Ghost of Mississippi. And that was also based on a true thing about the reinvestigation, and reprosecution of Byron De La Beckwith, the man who assassinated Medgar Evers. And in the first 2, it was the 3rd trial for him. He had been 2 hung juries before that, and 30 years went by, and they tried him again. And in the first 2 trials, he took the witness stand. In the 3rd trial, he didn't take the witness stand. And I felt like I can't do that. You know, you want the lawyer and the main antagonist and protagonist to go at each other like in Few Good Men, Nicholson and Cruz, that go at each other. But that didn't happen, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So, you know, we did it the way we did it. And it's the same with this. I mean, you know, I wouldn't want anything in there that John, Jonathan, Warren, or Joe would say, no, that's not right. So I had them with me. And so it came as close as we could to a documentary, but at the same time, you know, it hopefully reaches more people.
Well, you kind of answered my second question, which was going to be that with all those protagonists and them all being men, I wanted you to talk a little bit about shaping the story into a fictionalized feature film, but it sounds like there was very little fiction in the story.
Yeah, there was very little. I mean, right now we're in Hollywood particularly, we're in a world of diversity, which is good. We want to have diversity in front of the camera, behind the camera. But when you're doing historical things, you have to be accurate. You have to be accurate. So one of the journalists couldn't be a woman. That didn't happen. You know, when I did LBJ, every single member of Congress was a white male, every one of them. So that's what is there. And so I'd get criticized now for doing something like that, because where's the diversity? You have to be accurate. I believe if you're going to do a historical drama, it has to be accurate.
Well, finally, speaking of diversity, the movie is bookended by a young Black soldier who's destroyed by the war. He's so believable and so touching. It seems like it's a prescient touch for those of us who see the film today.
Yeah.
You did that.
Well, I mean, the truth is, since we have an all volunteer army, what you're finding is people of color.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
What you're finding, people of color, predominantly, Black military people, Latino military people. That's who's in the military. So I felt that he represented the people that were going to war based on a lie. It was the best way to represent that with him.
Well, thank you. I have to
Can
say.
Can I just say something about Rob and his absolute desire to get things as accurate as possible? On 9/11, I had been out at a hostile environment training course about usually about an hour and a half normal driving out of Washington, D.C. Get summoned back to D.C. I lived outside of Washington, and the roads were so clogged that I put my bicycle gear on and I rode my bike into work, which is what I usually did. I was asked what model, make, color my bike was, my bicycling gear, the bag that I put on the back of my bicycle holding my clothes, and what kind of helmet, and Rob's props guy tried to get as close to every accurate detail of my bike, my clothing, everything that I was wearing that day on 9/11.
Yeah, we tried to. We tried to get as close as we could. I mean, even if people don't know, they kind of know. It either feels real or it doesn't.
Well, I just wish that it could have another chance to get out there, and maybe through the streaming it will.
Yeah, no, films have a way of, lasting, and they don't go away. And ones that you think, well, that didn't work, all of a sudden it flies back up again. Listen, I want to thank you for you're William Wyler's daughter, right?
I
Am I
am.
right?
I
Oh my
am. Yes.
God. Hmm.
Which
Willie
has
Wyler.
been which has been a great thing to be. I have to
Oh
say.
my God! I mean, he's like one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And I remember, I want to tell the story very quickly. I remember I used to play tennis with Charlton Heston,
Uh-huh.
and Charlton Heston said that when he was working for Willie Wyler, and he would do something, and and Willie would say, "Do it again," and then he would do it again. Then he says, "Okay, do it again," and then he would do it again. He says, "Okay, that's fine," and then Charlton would go, "But Willie, if you didn't like it, just tell me. I'll do whatever." He says, "No, you don't understand. When I say do it again, you do it again. When I say don't do it again, then that's good." That was his way. He knew exactly what he wanted, and when he hit it, he got it. Anyway, he's a great film.
I'd love to send you a documentary that I made about him.
Oh, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it.
I will.
So we have Danny Davis is on our board. Danny, how many tours did you do in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Two in Iraq, two in Afghanistan.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one question that was just ringing in my ears the whole time I'm watching the show, and it's been there all along anyway, but this really emphasized it, that even while the fires were still burning in Washington and New York on 9/11, they were, there was already movements to take all this action into Iraq. And I was in the Army at the time, or shortly thereafter, and I ran into many people, 6-8 months ahead of time, who already said, "Hey, this is in the action planning already." Like it wasn't even an issue to be decided, but I mean, there was literally actions in the movement and preparations. And so the question that I didn't really get answered, I'd really like your view, is what was driving so passionately you're talking about Cheney, Rumsfeld, some of these other high-ranking people. Why were they so anxious to move against Iraq that they took action right away on 9/11?
Well, we talk about it in the film. I mean, if the journalists want to ask, but we talk about it in the film, and that the neocons, Bill Kristol and Wolfowitz and Doug Feith, they had written this treatise, The Project for the New American Century. And the idea was that America, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, America became the last remaining superpower. And the discussion was, what should we do with this power? What is the best use of American power? And the idea was to spread democracy through the Middle East. If we could get it, aside from Israel already had a democracy, but if in the Arab countries they could get a democracy, it would proliferate and flower like a garden of flowers. And if they could do that, that would ultimately benefit the United States and also expand democracy around the world. So Iraq seemed like the natural place to go, and that was already everybody's head before 9/11. Before 9/11.
I mean, I can certainly see the desire to have peace and democracy and all that, but it just seems really callous to say we're going to go to war, kill unknown numbers of thousands of people to get this hoped for outcome. That just doesn't seem American to me, and it's disturbing.
Yeah. Well, same thing happened in Vietnam. Same thing happened in Vietnam.
There's a feeling that Rumsfeld and Cheney and that lot thought that Afghanistan, where they were, our troops were doing a pretty good job, was a backward nation, 14th century, full of camel herders, and nobody would pay much attention there. We should put our money on Iraq, which was a bigger, more modern, and more effective use of our bombs, I guess.
Could I ask this question? I think it was in 1962, around then, there was Assistant Secretary of Defense, Arthur Sylvester, and he promulgated the right of the government to lie, at least if it related to what they called national security. Is the ethos of the government officials that you've dealt with in your careers, does that resonate with them? They believe that they're on a holy mission, chosen people that have a right to lie, to do the right thing?
I would have to say, by and large, no, especially when you're talking about public servants, civil servants. As John says in the movie, most of our sources were not at the very top, right? Some of them were, but most of them were the professional intelligence officers, diplomats, military officers who swore an oath to the Constitution. They work for the president, but it's for the Constitution. And I found over a career of now 35 years working in Washington, by and large, those people are honest, patriotic in the broadest sense of that word. They're hardworking. They don't deceive. Some of them do, of course, but by and large, no. I think when you get to the political echelons is where it gets different.
And at the higher levels.
Right, and that's reflected in the difference between our coverage and Judy Miller's, quite frankly. So
I think just to take Warren's point a little further, during the run up to the war and afterwards, we in journalism became familiar with a new government philosophy, policy, I don't know what you would call it, called strategic communications. And instead of public affairs, all of the public affairs offices in the Defense Department, the State Department, other places started calling themselves offices of strategic communications, led by directors of strategic communications. And at the White House, they went a step further. They got together with the Brits and they set up an entire strategic communications operation for imparting information about the run up to the war in Iraq and the grounds for invasion. And strategic communications, it turns out, is the practice of trying to convince the public through journalists that what they are seeing and what they know is not what they think they see and what they think they know. It's to convince people that in fact the sky is green and the grass is blue. And seriously, this is still the case today, where you do have still these offices of strategic communications that put out talking points, and you hear them when you call up individual press operations at the White House or the State Department or the Defense Department, and you get talking points. And if you watch the briefings, the daily briefings, and the Biden people do this, but I think the information they impart is not quite as strategically realigned as that was used or imparted during the run up to the war and during the Trump administration. But you watch them with these loose leaf binders, these big loose leaf binders that sit below the camera, and they open them up when they get a question, and you can see them paging through, looking for that sheet of paper that has all today's talking points on them. And the talking points aren't necessarily the truth. So do political appointees believe that they have a right to restructure information in a way that is beneficial to their political goals and their political agenda? Absolutely.
Well, as I said earlier, I think journalism bears some of the blame for this. And not to pick on one of the remaining really good newspapers, the off lead, the story on the top left-hand side of the Washington Post style section today, laments the fact that the Biden White House doesn't leak.
Yeah.
And, that about sums it up. If you think leaks are the sources you need to go to, that they're factual, that they don't come out of the same binders that John just talked about, you're crazy. And that was one of the saddest stories I've seen in a long time.
If I could ask another question, would you recommend any changes in journalism curriculum at the various professional schools that train the students to do the kind of critical thinking and analysis that you all did?
Well, I never took a journalism class in my life. So that's one way to answer the question. The other way to answer the question is that I've taught at Georgetown University now in their School of Foreign Service for 23 years. And what I emphasize more than anything else is critical thinking. And that's not confined to journalism, but it's essential to journalism. And I don't think we hit hard enough on that at any level of our education system. And I think that comes across in journalism, and it comes across in the line that Rob quoted earlier. When the government says something, you have only one question to ask. Is it true? Journalists are not stenographers.
So, John Kiriakou, can you jump in here? You have the distinction of both being a award winner yourself for standing up on torture during this administration that we're talking about, the Bush administration. Maybe you can provide us with some insight here.
I wanted to make one point, if I might, and that is the importance of journalists developing sources inside the intelligence community, the military, and the foreign policy establishment. Uh, Not gisting whatever official leak happens to come out or gisting whatever press release happens to come out, not just for a story to get out, but also to counter these false narratives that we hear so frequently. One of the problems that we had at the CIA, even in the post torture era, was so many CIA officers, senior CIA officers, who came out and had been a part of the torture program, just repeating the same lie over and over and over again, hoping that that lie would eventually become the official narrative. And so it was incumbent upon the rest of us, but mostly incumbent upon the media, I think, to get the truth, the ugly truth out there so that history knows what happened. So that the likes of Jose Rodriguez and Mitchell and Jessen and other monsters who were responsible for this dark period don't get to dictate what the official story is. And that's why I think the work of these wonderful journalists here tonight was so important. It's not just about telling the story at the time that it's being told. It's about putting that marker in history that's so important for future generations.
Can I ask something to follow up on that? Because
Sure.
you talk about sources inside the intelligence community, and that to me would be the most difficult to find
Yes.
something accurate, because aside from protecting sources and methods, which they always will say, you talk about strategic communication. They really spoon feed what they want. And from what I understand, at least in the past, and I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of different ex-intelligence people, is that there are assets at journalism outlets that will be more than happy to print what they
Yes.
want the public to hear. So
You're
it's
absolutely
really
right.
difficult, it would seem to me. I'm just asking, what do you
Yes.
think?
You are absolutely right. And this is becoming, in my view, this is becoming more and more of a problem as time passes. For example, we know from a reporter at BuzzFeed, Jason Leopold, who did a Freedom of Information Act request for all communications between the CIA's Office of Public Affairs and journalists over an X number of years period. We know that Ken Delanian at NBC and MSNBC was submitting his articles to the CIA before he sent them to his own editor to see if it was okay, if the information was okay. That's not journalism. And I would add too, and I say this to journalists all the time, it's a felony in this country, believe it or not, to classify a crime. So if something is a criminal act, like a torture program, or like lying to the American people to say that there is a weapons of mass destruction program in Iraq, that's a crime. And so by definition, that information cannot be classified. If it cannot be classified, then there's got to be one person out there who's going to be willing to talk about it. Those are the kinds of sources that we should be developing.
I would just add that as somebody who still covers the intelligence community on a daily basis, I mean, it's extremely hard on several levels.
Sure.
John, as you're saying, I mean, what does the CIA do but recruit and manipulate, right? They're
That's
really
right.
good at it. And they do that from a public affairs strategy too.
Mhm.
That's one point. Second point, under Trump, it was darn near impossible for different reasons because every time anybody in the intelligence community stuck their head up and tried to speak truth to power, he shot them down. So Gina Haspel and her whole crew just developed a strategy of hiding behind the fortress and trying to protect the institution. We can disagree all day long about whether that was right or not, but that's what they did, and it made journalism really, really hard. I would just say finally, it's all about, as with intelligence work, it's all about trust building, right, with your sources.
Without
And
a
that
doubt.
takes a lot of time, multiple meetings, knowing what you're talking about, being willing to listen to stuff and not rush it into the paper. And I worry, getting back to a point that John Walcott made earlier, that today's journalists are all about getting on Twitter with the latest scoop.
Absolutely right.
Can
You're
I
absolutely
just
right.
can I just add to that? In my experience, excuse in most cases, at least in my experience, the information and the analyses that are done at the working level in the intelligence community are generally pretty good. Take, for example, the New York Times recent story on the CIA's warning. It was a warning to the Trump administration, but it has been used here again in the Biden administration about the impact of a U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's something that I could have written too, having covered Afghanistan now since the Soviets were there. Nevertheless, it was absolutely spot on. But once that information gets up into the upper echelons, the higher levels of not just the intelligence community, but in particular the policy makers, the consumers of that intelligence, that's when it gets taken and twisted for political use. And you know, one of the stories, and this we were writing before the age of the internet. Well, not the age of Twitter and Facebook, but one of the stories that I wrote that got the biggest reaction in terms of phone calls and emails was a story that I did at the suggestion of somebody who had worked in the national security bureaucracy, to take the public version of the 2002 National Intelligence Estimate on Iraq's WMD and compare it to the actual classified version that was eventually the Bush administration was forced to declassify because after they didn't find any WMD in Iraq. And the differences between what the public was being told in the unclassified version and what the intelligence community was telling the policymakers in the classified version was night and day. It was unbelievable what they did in terms of twisting and turning the information they had to present it to the public compared to what they were telling policymakers. So in my experience, a lot of the work that's done in the collection, in the analysis of the collection, and in the presentation of those analyses from the working levels has been pretty good. It's once it gets up to the levels of to senior levels, to levels of officialdom in the intelligence community that have actual daily contact with the policymakers. That's where where the sausage machine comes in and turns out a completely different sausage.
And that gets us back to the issue of oversight. Where are the oversight committees in all this? Because the oversight committees are getting both the classified and unclassified versions. What we really need, what the country really needs, is Frank Church. Instead, we have two committees with both Democrats and Republicans that act more like cheerleaders for the intelligence community. They're not there to be cheerleaders. They're there to be overseers.
Except in the run-up to the war, the chairman, one of the few voices of sanity on Capitol Hill, was the chairman of the then chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the senator from, Florida, the late
Bob
senator.
Graham.
Bob Graham, the late Bob Graham from Florida, who came out of a classified briefing, and I'm paraphrasing here to say, I haven't heard anything in there that changed my mind, that told me that Saddam Hussein has suddenly become an imminent threat to the United States.
That's right.
But Bob Graham was the only one.
There was also Carl Levin, the chairman of the
Armed
Services Committee.
Yeah. But that's it. But you're right, Rob. That was basically it, because it had been politicized. The issue had been politicized to such an extent that even, the current president of the United States voted in favor of the authorization for the use of force.
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
I'm Pat Malloy. I was in my youth. I was in UN political affairs in the State Department. I was an FSO, but later I was up on the Senate Banking Committee, where I was general counsel to Proxmire and then for Sarbanes and others. At the time this was going on in 2000, I was teaching public international law at Catholic U. I saw this was a clear violation of the UN Charter. So there are two questions I have. Where was the legal community in standing up to saying this is just a complete violation of international law, which we have tried to promote since World War II? Secondly, the vote in the Senate was actually, and I printed it out this morning, there were 28 Democrats, there were 21 Democrats who voted against this damn thing. And it was Byrd's finest hour. He was on that floor every day, and I was sending over information to his office to help him make those arguments. So why did all these damn Democrats, 29 of them, why did they all vote for this thing? It was outrageous. And I just don't understand. There was one Republican who voted against it, Lincoln Chafee, who later became a Democrat. All the Republicans voted for it. But why did so many damn Democrats vote for this damn thing?
I can tell you why I think that Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton did. I mean, you couldn't look like, if you were ever thinking of running for president, I don't think you could look like you were soft on national security. That's my take, but I could be wrong.
But remember this about Joe Biden, that in his campaign to become the Democratic nominee in 2008 for the presidency, he went out of his way to say that if President Bush bombed Iran, went to war without a congressional declaration, he would lead the impeachment charge. And he said, I've been around, taught separation of powers, consulted with all the greatest constitutional scholars in the land, and he repeated on several occasions, I will lead the charge to impeach him. So it's an example, I think, of his ulterior political motives dictate what the law is at that particular time and place. We know the Office of Legal Counsel, and it's not just under John Yoo, who wrote the memorandum saying the president has limitless power to go to war anytime he wants. He doesn't even need to go to Congress. William Barr, who was served as Attorney General before under H.W. Bush, before he came back under Trump, said the same thing. The executive branch files these ridiculous memoranda. Congress doesn't really have any intellectual infrastructure to refute it, and it becomes the law because the Supreme Court says nothing because they're standing in political questions and things like that. And it is truly astounding that our legal profession sits silently while the most important provision of the Constitution is raped virtually every single day.
So I see we have from New York Rabbi Shapiro, and we also have another Rabbi Singer. So you represent a part of our moral community. Maybe you should, you would like to participate at this point. Yakshif? Yakshif was a former Salon speaker before the pandemic. Good. I can see you're unmuted.
If you were to ask me, I would ask a question regarding the education of the public. We mentioned before that the government, the debate whether the government has a right to lie in the interest of security to hide stuff from the public. So now imagine if and also we mentioned that most of the public, or a lot of them, get their information as to what's true or false from movies. Now, it seems to me that both of these things are problematic. And the reason for both of the problems is that the public is not educated. Why does the public know? Why do they not know that when they go to movies, it's fiction? Or to whatever extent it's not true, it's not true. Why are they not being taught that what you're seeing is not reality? That will make things easier. Why are they not taught that journalism is to a large extent a business? We mentioned, I have that comment up there, that journalism is an art. But there are artists that commercialize their arts and put out garbage so people can buy it. And the real artists rely on the fact that there are a small amount of people who are willing to pay a great amount of money for real art. But in journalism, the journalists, the industry relies on, it's a competitive industry and it relies on advertising. And advertising by definition means numbers. And how in the world are you going to maintain an art, journalism, that needs commercial strategies in order to survive? So I see a societal conflict over here. And the only way that it can move forward to some degree, in my view, is through educating the public as to all of the things that we're mentioning over here. If the public would know what the government does, and if the public would know how journalism works, and if public would know the problems that are causing them, that are pressuring industries to give them false information, they could push back and try to get the real information. But so long as they're not being educated and that they're under the impression that what they see in Hollywood is reflective of reality. And if they're under the impression that journalism really, newspapers are not in the business of selling news, they're in the business of selling ads. Most people don't realize that. Whatever the advertisers want, that's what the newspapers are going to print. And just people need to know the reality and need to be educated. And then they can push back. Otherwise, I don't see, I see this as a regular societal capitalistic conflict of interests in industries, conflicting with moral integrity.
I think you saw that conflict in the movie, Rob, where you had John Walcott going up and getting in the face of what was the Philadelphia Inquirer? Why aren't you publishing my stories? And so you saw the conflict between people who had integrity and people who didn't in the industry. Showed the complexity of and what were the stats of John Walcott? What were the numbers in terms of, you did over 80, I think it was 83 stories, or over 80 stories, and how many of those were, did you keep track of how many of the outlets, the 31 papers or whatever in the chain, published the stories?
No, John, I never kept account because for me, journalism is an art, not a business. But I will interject that the Philadelphia Inquirer took the hit for the team on that. They were not the only paper that refused to print most of what we wrote. A lot of them preferred the New York Times because it was the New York Times. And how could we possibly know something the New York Times did? And secondly, the New York Times was in step with public opinion. It was in step with country music. It was in step with culture post 9/11. And we were out of step. And, hopefully, thanks to Tony and my immediate boss, Clark Hoyt, we were able to stay the course and not bow to those pressures.
Well,
Let me
good.
say something.
I would say to the gentleman from New York that if journalism is a business, it's bankrupt now. The business model doesn't work. It hasn't worked for a number of years now. And one of the real threats to democracy is the fact that nobody's going to be covering America the way we're going.
John Henry, could I
That's
make
right.
a couple comments?
Sure.
It's Terry Smith.
Hey, Terry. Got the New York Times?
Yeah. I mean, so much of this goes back to Vietnam and to the message management of Vietnam that went on. I was there as the bureau chief in '69 and '70 for the Times. And, from the 5 o'clock follies to the briefings of Ellsworth Bunker, the ambassador at the time, it was fantasy. I have great admiration for Jonathan Landay and John Walcott and the people who really told the story on the run up to the Iraq War. I was at the NewsHour at the time. Jim Lehrer was in charge. And I went to him at one point and said, we have nothing on this broadcast but people who support the idea of going to war against these illusory weapons of mass destruction. And he said, all right, we'll have Teddy Kennedy on tomorrow night. And indeed we did. But it didn't, it did not balance the scales. And as for Colin Powell, whose name was somewhat abused earlier, he has, while he may or may not have apologized, he has spoken very frankly about his performance at the UN and how he's misled. And so if that's an apology, fine. But this is a great discussion. I haven't seen Rob Reiner's film yet, but if Catherine Weiler says it's good, I'll buy it.
Can I just chime in there on the idea? Yes, journalism is a business, but it's constitutionally unusual business. We have a role given to us by the founders of this country to be, to hold power accountable, to be a check on the abuse of power. And if journalism was a business, was strictly a business, was strictly about making money, we would not have had the exposés of the Pentagon Papers. We would not have had the exposés of Watergate. We would not have had what we did, because nobody really wanted to read that stuff. Was not about attracting, as they say now, eyeballs, because it was politically, it didn't run with the political mainstream. Nobody tells me, and I've been in this business for 30 years now, more than 30 years. Nobody comes to me in the morning and says, cover this story and not that story, because this one is going to make us money and that one isn't. That has never happened. I cover the stories that I believe the American people, and now that I work for Reuters, people around the world need to know about. And we discuss it. We have editorial meetings in the morning, every morning. Who's going to do what? What are we going to cover? What are the themes? At no point ever in my career has anybody said to me, don't cover that story because it won't make us money.
Can I say something about that? Because we need more places like where you're working, Reuters, to do that. Because if you look at the history of news and how news was presented to the American public, you can point directly to when this started going off the rails. And it was in 1968, which was during the Vietnam War, and 60 Minutes came on the air. Up until that point, news outlets were a lost leader for networks. They didn't make money on news. You lost money on that. It was a big deal when Walter Cronkite went from 15 minutes a day to 30 minutes a day. That was a big, big deal. In 1968, 60 Minutes came on, and for the first time, they found that news was a profit center. That was the first time ever in network television, and it has been eroded ever since then. And unfortunately, papers like where you work, Jonathan, and Reuters and stuff, they can't compete with cable news and 60 Minutes and network news and all of that, and they are about making money. Unfortunately, not all, but a big chunk of it is about making money.
If I could just pipe up here at some point, John.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
So I've been in PSYOPs, Army PSYOPs, was trained there, Guantanamo defense attorney. So I've been in the belly of the beast, you could say, of news management, or what the United States Department of Defense now calls perception management. But as the last three speakers just pointed out, this all grew out of the Vietnam War. And in accordance with what I was doing with Guantanamo, I had to do a lot of research. And the generals who were losing the Vietnam War, they all came out of it charging that the media had stabbed us in the back, basically, by telling the truth, although they didn't put it that way. And in fact, so the United States military actually adopted policies ever since, and it's open. All you have to do is go online and look for perception management. You can see how it is the United States government now actually works to manipulate the news. And so Knight Ridder, the fantastic job that you guys all did, you're very much in the minority because everyone else is sort of taking heed from CIA, DOD, et cetera. And if they're not taking it openly, they're doing it behind the scenes, so to speak, as perception management. So that's what we're up against ultimately. And to hide behind, well, this isn't American, is being naive, because this is America today. And has been developing ever since the Vietnam War, I would argue, to where it's gotten at its high point at this point.
Could I
Any
make a
comments
point?
on that?
Is it okay if I make a point? So you may be wondering, what is a rabbi doing in the middle of this conversation? I used to be a TV producer. In fact, I worked with Kathy Weiler at PBS. And then coincidentally, I happened to be related to Rob and Michelle. I didn't even know they were going to be on this Zoom. So hello, and congratulations to all the journalists. Particularly as a rabbi, I agree with what everybody has said in terms of critiquing the media. However, and particularly in terms of what Mr. Shapiro said, yes, facts are important, and it'd be nice if people got the truth. But you know what? Facts don't change people's minds. Somebody said that earlier about, Trump can do anything he wants, and yet, you can expose all his misdeeds, and it won't change people's mind. I was just studying a text earlier this morning about existential anxiety, and there are a lot of people in this country who are experiencing existential anxiety because they've lost jobs and therefore their place in society and dignity and money and all of that. And they're grasping at some kind of certainty to help them navigate what they consider to be a very scary world. And I think that needs to be addressed too, because you can bring out all the facts you want and give people the truth, and it's not going to matter. So I wish that somebody would maybe address that issue too. Thank you.
Rabbi Singer, I think, and I've used this in my class at Georgetown this year, the roots to that are anthropological. Humans tend to trust people in their tribe and to be wary of and to distrust people in another tribe. And social media has really amplified that tendency. It's divided us into tribes, and the Trump tribe will believe anything that other members of it say because they're members of the tribe. And those other people, they're dangerous. They might come over the hill with their spears and attack us. And there was a very interesting study done, 5 or so years ago by the University College London about how cultural influences affect how people use social media, what pictures they do and don't post, what they do and don't discuss. So strip away all the technology, all the algorithms, and you get back to human behavior that's tens of thousands of years old. And social media hasn't created that. It's just brought it to the forefront.
Definitely. What do we do about it?
Well, I agree with the other rabbi. I think education is the key to this. I don't think we're teaching critical thinking. I don't think we teach civics anymore. I find I often have to sort of importune my students to question me, to challenge me. It's not ingrained. What's ingrained is how do I get the highest score? How can I get an LSAT score that will get me into Harvard? Or how do I get an SAT score that will get me into Yale? That's not thinking.
Well, I think one of the things was continue to celebrate the people like the 4 journalists and the movie maker tonight so that their examples are rewarded and it'll encourage young people to emulate them. It may sound small, but it's very, very important that they be exalted for what they're doing because it's so rare. It's very easy to succumb to peer pressure, to go along with the crowd. You get popularity, you don't risk ostracism or false accusations of disloyalty. And I think that's one of the reasons the Committee for the Republic exists, to make sure that these true heroes, the true DNA of our republic, are properly recognized. And the more of this, the better. The more the audience can share the names of these 4 journalists, the better. They need to be on Mount Rushmore more than the current.
I would agree, but what's sad is that huge swaths of America no longer have a real newspaper. They only have a shopper or, frankly, newspapers run by terrible people. And that is a national tragedy.
May I say and ask something?
Yeah, you're on.
Muted. Okay, thanks. Since last fall, I've been trying to get the National Press Club to stand up for Julian Assange. I have failed miserably, and I cannot even get a rationale to push back on. Why do you think there's so much reticence in particularly the mainstream media to come out and stand up for him, and in particular to recognize that what we're heading for in that prosecution or persecution is a de facto Official Secrets Act?
Who wants to take that question?
I'll jump in and be the skunk at the garden party. I don't think Julian Assange is a journalist. He's an advocate, and he's a person, in my view, who was happy to expose the secrets of the U.S., and that's fine by me. But
just to point out,
expose the secrets of the Russia or China or what have you. He doesn't do journalism the way I do journalism, or I think John Walcott, Joe Galloway, and Jonathan Landay do journalism.
Lots of folks, of course, like Daniel Ellsberg, strongly disagree with that interpretation. And for what it's worth, he tried to get both the Pentagon and the State Department to help him redact and call out the sensitive information, and they refused. He also did the same with editors, one of whom published the access code to the information, after which everything fell apart on that. But I don't, I guess my confusion comes from, he does what you all do. He asks for information. He takes it and he publishes it. And if he can be prosecuted for this, why wouldn't we enter into a situation like the UK has with the Official Secrets Act, where if you take that information, you as a journalist are going to become a target.
We kind of do have an Official Secrets Act, although when it's used, they use it to go after the leakers, the government leakers, and not the journalists. But they do try to get the government leakers by prosecuting the journalists to force them to disclose their sources. I cannot claim to be an expert on Mr. Assange's case. One of the things I do know is that he tried to encourage the hacking of the Pentagon, of Pentagon computers. That's something no journalist would ever do.
I think
It's not my job to hack anyone. I can take the product of hacking. We wouldn't have had the Panama Papers without that. But and then my sources who have given me, I've had classified materials given to me. They don't want to be exposed. They don't seek the publicity associated with the leaks that they are giving me. They don't want their names anywhere. They don't want to be exposed at all. And so, again, with the noting that I'm not an expert on Mr. Assange's case, I feel that he did expose the government monitoring, illegal monitoring of Americans' communication. Kudos to him. I think that was really important because it can be used against journalists, used against ordinary citizens. But give the information to the journalist and keep your name out of the limelight, out of the newspaper headlines. Don't meet journalists in Hong Kong and then appear on camera and fly to Russia. Do what most sources do, which is turn the information over and stay anonymous.
I would add, John, the other difference is like when you get a classified document or I get a classified document, we don't publish it in full in whatever outlet we're working for, right? We analyze it, we weigh it, we talk to government officials. They can't tell us what to do. They don't. Believe me, the CIA was very unhappy when I was allowed to read the highly classified assessment 2.5 years ago of MBS's role in Jamal Khashoggi's death. This was long before the report that came out the other day. I told them what I had precisely, said we're going to print it, and they did not try to talk me out of it. But you have to have those conversations, and you have to weigh what you have. You have to analyze it, cross-check it with other sources. That's journalism. Taking the document and publishing it on the internet, to me, is not. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. I had a story. John was my editor on this one, where I was given highly classified CIA documents that chronicled every single drone strike that the CIA launched against terrorists in northern Pakistan, not even Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and determined from their own records that they had droned more than 600 people at a time when President Obama was talking about how they were only going after the leaders of Al Qaeda and associated groups. I got those documents from a source who trusted me, gave me the documents. I went through a series of what espionage agents called, the methods that they use to ensure that nobody knows where they go or how they get the information. And in the end, I ended up giving the documents back to my source. That source didn't want their names out there, didn't want to be known, and I had to assure them that I would go to jail before I told anybody who they were. And that is exactly the opposite of what Mr. Assange has done.
Rupert Murdoch.
I've got to butt in here, if I may, in defense of Julian Assange, and most recently Daniel Hale, who did reveal information about the drone on promises that he wouldn't be revealed, et cetera, et cetera. He's now being charged under the Espionage Act, and most likely will serve the rest of his life in a supermax prison. And so as much as I appreciate the previous speaker, but why didn't you do something with the information? 600 civilians killed, that's a war crime. The Julian Assange, as his 21st century version of journalism, he wasn't getting his name out there for his own name. He's taking leaks from people like Daniel Hale, Edward Snowden, Thomas Drake, well, not Thomas Drake, but others, and telling us, the American people, of the war crimes being committed. If somebody had told us that in the Vietnam War, maybe we would have stopped that war sooner.
I used those documents to write a series of stories. I wrote the stories. I did. I published them. But I didn't need, in the process, to give my source publicity.
But the point is, and as a Guantanamo defense attorney, I've had to get secondhand information because I'm not allowed to even look at it because I'm still under the U.S. Army. That's how extreme it is. They won't allow the U.S. military to look at WikiLeaks because they're afraid we might get dangerous ideas in our heads. I mean, that's what the government is looking at. That's what perception management is. We're not supposed to have dangerous ideas anymore. So what Julian Assange did was he put his finger up against that in this way and said, no, I'm going to get this information out. When we massacred, whatever the movie name was, these people are laughing about killing some Iraqi people. And getting that kind of information out to the American people might have, had we taken it seriously, said, end this war. Instead, we kept on doing it and inciting more and more Iraqis against it.
Todd, I see that.
Yeah, I don't mean to talk too long.
This is I see that Terry Ward, who was in Florence, has gone to bed, and Jonathan Clark in New York are, who we did a salon on his book on against Iraq, and right after he's gone. So I think the witching hour has arrived, and this has been a fascinating conversation, and I see that we have many Walcotts and other daughters and grandchildren, and you should be very proud of your father and the team that he led, and these are all great men, and very proud to makes me proud to be an American to
and me
be
too, if I may add.
in their
Apologies
country.
for putting in too much here, so I'm quiet now.
So great. Thank you, John Kiriakou, for everything. And Rob, it was great that you did this film and got more attention on all this. So thank you, everyone. And
before you go, John, John Henry, this is Terry. Before you go, to
yes,
those of us who have not seen the film, how can we see the film?
it's on it's on Amazon, and there's also a link on the invitation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great.
Thank you very much.